The movie The Laundromat unfolds as a darkly satirical and fragmented story about the hidden global systems of money corruption and legal manipulation, using multiple interconnected narratives to expose how the ultra-wealthy exploit financial loopholes. It begins with a direct address to the audience by two charismatic narrators, Gary Oldman and Antonio Banderas, who portray fictionalized versions of real-life lawyers involved in offshore finance. They explain the evolution of money from barter systems to modern financial instruments, emphasizing how money has become increasingly abstract, invisible, and complex. This introduction sets the tone for a story that blends humor with harsh truths about systemic inequality. The central storyline follows Ellen Martin, played by Meryl Streep, an ordinary widow whose life is shattered after her husband Joe dies in a tragic boating accident on a lake. The accident, caused by negligence and poor maintenance, results in multiple deaths, devastating the community. As Ellen struggles with grief, she also seeks justice and compensation. However, what initially seems like a straightforward insurance claim quickly spirals into a bewildering maze of legal and financial deception. Ellen discovers that the insurance company responsible for covering the accident is not what it appears to be. The policy had been passed through multiple entities, from a local insurer to a larger firm and then reinsured by another company. Eventually she learns that the supposed reinsurer, United Reinsurance, is nothing more than a shell company, an entity that exists only on paper with no real assets or accountability. The policy itself had lapsed under suspicious circumstances, leaving victims' families without compensation. This revelation introduces Ellen and the audience to the world of offshore tax havens and shell corporations. Parallel to Ellen's story, the film presents several other vignettes that illustrate how offshore finance operates globally. One storyline involves a corrupt African politician's family, showing how public funds are secretly diverted into hidden accounts. Another follows a Chinese businessman entangled in an affair and financial misconduct, demonstrating how personal greed intersects with systemic corruption. These stories, though seemingly unrelated, all connect back to the same network of shell companies and legal structures designed to obscure ownership and avoid accountability. Throughout the film, the narrators, loosely based on real-life figures associated with the law firm Mossack Fonseca, break the fourth wall to explain complex financial concepts in simple, often ironic terms. They describe how shell companies are created, entities with no employees, no offices, and no real operations, existing solely to hold assets and hide the identities of their true owners. These companies are often registered in offshore jurisdictions like Panama, the Seychelles, or the British Virgin Islands, where secrecy laws protect clients from scrutiny. Ellen's investigation becomes more personal as she traces the chain of deception across multiple countries. She travels to places like Nevis, searching for the individuals behind the fraudulent companies. There she encounters absurd and revealing situations, including discovering that the supposed director of a company is merely a nominal figurehead, a poor local man paid to sign documents without understanding their significance. This highlights how the system exploits not only the victims but also those at the bottom, who are used as legal fronts. As Ellen digs deeper, she uncovers that the entire structure is designed to prevent accountability. Each layer of ownership leads to another shell company, another jurisdiction, another legal barrier. Responsibility is endlessly deferred, making it nearly impossible for victims to find justice. The system thrives on complexity and confusion, ensuring that those who suffer losses are left powerless. Eventually, Ellen realizes that her personal tragedy is just one small part of a much larger global issue. The same mechanisms that denied her compensation are used worldwide to hide wealth, evade taxes, and protect corrupt individuals. Despite her determination, she is unable to recover the money or hold anyone directly accountable. However, her journey transforms her from a grieving widow into someone who understands the systemic nature of the problem. In the film's final act, the narrative shifts back to the two narrators, who begin to lose their polished, confident demeanor. Their carefully constructed world starts to unravel as public scrutiny increases. This reflects the real-world exposure of the Panama Papers, a massive leak of confidential documents that revealed how offshore entities were used by politicians, celebrities, and wealthy individuals to hide assets and avoid taxes. The film suggests that while the system is deeply entrenched, it is not entirely immune to exposure. Overall, The Laundromat is less a traditional narrative and more a cinematic essay on the secret life of money. By combining personal tragedy, global corruption, and educational commentary, it exposes the hidden mechanisms that allow wealth to be concealed and accountability to be avoided. The film challenges viewers to confront the uncomfortable truth that the financial systems shaping the world are often designed to benefit a select few at the expense of many, and that understanding these systems is the first step toward change. The film The Laundromat continues its layered satirical exploration of global financial corruption by expanding beyond Ellen Martin's personal tragedy into a broader, interconnected web of greed, power, and secrecy. The story is guided by the two narrators, played by Gary Oldman and Antonio Banderas, who portray the founders of a powerful offshore law firm. They present themselves as businessmen who simply provide a service, creating companies for clients, but gradually reveal the moral ambiguity and consequences of their work. One of the key threads shows how the firm grew from modest beginnings into a global operation. One of the partners explains that he initially wanted to help the poor and studied law with idealistic ambitions inspired by figures like Father Hector Gallego, a priest who advocated for the oppressed in Panama and was killed for challenging authority. However, over time he became disillusioned with the idea of saving the world and instead chose to save himself by working for wealthy clients. This shift represents a central theme of the film, the tension between morality and self-interest. The firm eventually becomes Mossack Fonseca, a massive network creating thousands of offshore entities in tax havens across the globe. The narrators explain how their business works. Clients rarely come directly, instead they are referred by bankers and lawyers. The firm creates shell companies, entities that exist only on paper to hold assets and obscure ownership. These companies provide privacy, which the narrators distinguish from secrecy, though the line between the two is often blurred. They admit that while some clients are legitimate business people, others may be criminals, but they deliberately avoid knowing too much. Their role, they insist, is not to judge but to facilitate. Another storyline focuses on a wealthy and influential family, illustrating how money and power corrupt personal relationships. The father, a successful businessman, is exposed as having an affair with his daughter's friend. When the daughter discovers the betrayal, the situation escalates into a negotiation rather than a moral reckoning. The father attempts to silence his daughter by offering her control of a shell company worth millions of dollars, transferred through bearer shares documents that grant ownership simply by possession with no official record of identity. This moment demonstrates how wealth can be used to manipulate truth and avoid consequences. However, even this apparent gift turns out to be an illusion. When the daughter investigates, she learns that the company's assets have already been moved elsewhere through a complex network of trusts and offshore entities. Despite technically owning the company, she has no real control over its money. This reveals another key aspect of the system. Ownership is often meaningless, as real power lies hidden behind layers of legal structures. The daughter realizes that she has been deceived just like countless others, and that the system is designed to protect those at the top. The film also explores an international corruption case involving Chinese political elites and a British businessman. In this storyline, a businessman helps facilitate bribes through offshore companies, enabling powerful figures to secretly accumulate wealth. The arrangement initially benefits all parties, but greed leads to further demands and threats. When the businessman attempts to blackmail his partners, the situation turns deadly and he is poisoned. The authorities later arrest the political figures involved, but the film makes it clear that the underlying system enabling such corruption remains intact. Throughout these stories, the narrators repeatedly deny responsibility. They argue that they did not create corruption, they merely provided tools that others chose to misuse. They trace the origins of these practices to places like the United States, where corporate-friendly laws in states such as Delaware allowed companies to register with minimal oversight. This, they claim, inspired offshore tax havens around the world. The film emphasizes the thin line between tax avoidance, which is legal, and tax evasion, which is not, suggesting that the system is deliberately structured to blur this distinction. Ellen Martin's storyline continues in parallel, showing the emotional toll of her struggle. After losing her husband and failing to obtain compensation due to fraudulent insurance arrangements, she becomes increasingly obsessed with understanding how the system works. She researches offshore companies and discovers the widespread use of these structures by politicians, corporations, and wealthy individuals. Her frustration grows as she realizes that the problem is not just individual wrongdoing but a systemic issue embedded in global finance. As Ellen reflects on her situation, she recognizes that ordinary people are at a disadvantage. They lack the resources to influence laws or navigate complex financial systems. Meanwhile, the wealthy use lawyers and accountants to exploit loopholes and avoid responsibility. Her anger is directed not only at those who wronged her but at a system that allows such behavior to continue legally. She questions why those who cause harm are rarely held accountable and expresses a desire for justice, even if it means simply hearing an apology or seeing someone face consequences. The film reaches a turning point with the revelation of a massive data leak known as the Panama Papers, which exposes the inner workings of Mossack Fonseca and its clients. This leak, attributed to an anonymous whistleblower named John Doe, reveals how offshore companies are used worldwide to hide wealth, evade taxes, and facilitate corruption. The exposure leads to political scandals, resignations, and public outrage across multiple countries. The narrators react defensively, portraying themselves as victims of a breach of privacy. They argue that they were simply following the law and that their clients' actions are not their responsibility. However, their confidence begins to crumble as investigations intensify and their firm faces legal and reputational consequences. Offices are shut down and their empire starts to collapse, symbolizing the fragility of a system built on secrecy. In the final moments, the film shifts from satire to a more direct message. The whistleblower's statement is presented, calling for global action against corruption and highlighting the failure of democratic systems to regulate financial practices effectively. The message emphasizes that the problem is not just a few bad actors but a deeply flawed system that benefits the powerful at the expense of everyone else. Ellen delivers a powerful closing reflection, representing the voice of ordinary people. She points out that while many of these practices are technically legal, they undermine fairness and shift the burden onto those who cannot afford to avoid taxes. She urges viewers to ask questions, demand accountability, and recognize their role in pushing for change. The film ends by reminding the audience that although Mossack Fonseca has fallen, many similar firms still operate around the world. The system persists, adapting and evolving, and the issues it creates remain unresolved. Ultimately, The Laundromat presents a sobering picture of a world where money moves invisibly, laws are manipulated, and justice is often out of reach, challenging viewers to confront the realities of global finance and its impact on everyday life. If you enjoy watching this video, then subscribe to Angel Recaps for the latest movies explanation.